This is my true story. For 6 months, every Sunday morning, my wife and 3 adult children left the house together, claiming they were running errands or spending family time. When I asked to join, my wife would make excuses saying I should rest or that I'd be bored. They'd return around 2 in the afternoon with red eyes like they'd been crying. Last Sunday, I told them I was going to a friend's house. Instead, I followed them. What I discovered destroyed me. Before that, tell us where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. And please subscribe to this channel so that my stories can reach more people. For 6 months, every single Sunday morning, my wife and 3 adult children had developed a mysterious routine that never included me. It started subtly. One Sunday, they all mentioned they were going out together. Shopping maybe. Running some errands. They asked if I wanted to come, but in a way that made it clear they hoped I'd say no. I said I was fine staying home. They seemed relieved. That became the pattern every Sunday for half a year. Every Sunday morning around 9 o'clock, they'd all start getting ready to leave. My wife would put on her nice clothes. Not church clothes, but nicer than what you'd wear for grocery shopping. My 3 adult children would show up at the house. Sarah is my oldest at 35. Then Michael at 32. Then Jennifer at 28. They all live nearby with their own families. But every Sunday they'd come to our house and the 4 of them would leave together. I'd ask where they were going. My wife would give vague answers. We're just running errands together. Or, we're spending some family time. Or, just doing some shopping. Nothing specific, nothing concrete. Just these general explanations that didn't really explain anything. When I'd ask what kind of errands or where they were shopping, they'd brush off the question. Say it was boring stuff I wouldn't be interested in. Say I should relax and enjoy having the house to myself. After the first few weeks, I started asking to join them. I'm not an invalid. I'm only 62 years old. I can go shopping. I can run errands. I don't need to be left home alone every Sunday like a child. But whenever I'd suggest coming along, my wife would make excuses. She'd say I should rest, that I'd been working hard all week and deserved a relaxing Sunday. She'd say they were just doing boring things I'd hate. She'd insist I'd be more comfortable at home. My children would back her up. They'd say it was really nothing interesting, just mundane tasks. They'd promise to be back soon. They'd tell me to watch football or read or do whatever I wanted. They made it sound like they were doing me a favor by not dragging me along to their boring Sunday activities. But something about the whole situation felt wrong, felt secretive, like they were hiding something from me. They'd leave together all piled into one car, usually my son Michael's SUV since it was big enough for everyone. I'd watch from the window as they drove away. Then I'd be alone in the house for the next 5 hours. They'd always return around 2 in the afternoon, like clockwork. Every Sunday they'd be gone from 9 to 2. 5 hours of mysterious family time that didn't include me. The isolation hurt more than I wanted to admit. This was my wife of 40 years. These were my 3 children I'd raised from birth. We'd always been a close family. We did things together. We included each other. But suddenly every Sunday they were excluding me, deliberately leaving me behind, acting like whatever they were doing was something I couldn't be part of. It felt like rejection, like being pushed out of my own family. I started dreading Sundays. I'd wake up knowing they'd be leaving soon, knowing I'd spend another day alone while my family did something secret without me. I'd try to act normal, try not to show how much it bothered me. But inside I felt abandoned, hurt, confused about why my own family was shutting me out. What had I done wrong? Why wasn't I wanted anymore? I tried talking to my wife about it. I told her it hurt to be excluded every week. I said I felt left out. She'd apologize and say they weren't trying to exclude me. She'd repeat that it was just boring errands. Nothing I was missing out on. She'd promise it wouldn't be forever. Just a temporary thing they were dealing with. But she never explained what they were dealing with. Never gave me a real reason for the secrecy. My children were the same way when I talked to them individually. They'd apologize for making me feel excluded. They'd insist it wasn't intentional. They'd say they loved me and would spend more time with me soon. But they never invited me to join these Sunday outings. Never explained where they were really going. Never gave me straight answers about what was happening. The vagueness was maddening. If they'd just told me what they were doing, I might have understood. Maybe it was something legitimately private that didn't involve me. But the secrecy made it worse. made me imagine all kinds of scenarios. Were they meeting with a lawyer to discuss something? Were they planning some kind of intervention? Were they talking about me behind my back? My mind went to dark places trying to figure out what could require all four of them every single Sunday for 6 months. I noticed they'd coordinate their stories. If I asked my wife where they went, she'd say one thing. If I asked my son later, he'd say the exact same thing, almost word for word. Like they'd rehearsed it. Like they'd agreed on what to tell me. That level of coordination meant they were definitely hiding something. You don't need matching stories unless you're covering up the truth. The Sunday routine became a source of tension in our home. I'd be short-tempered and irritable, knowing they were about to leave again. My wife would be defensive when I asked questions. My children would change the subject when I brought it up. We were all walking on eggshells around this unspoken thing nobody would explain to me. It was poisoning our family relationships, creating distance and distrust where there used to be openness. I felt increasingly isolated as the months went on. My own family had a secret, a routine, a ritual that I wasn't part of. Every Sunday they'd disappear together, leaving me behind. Every Sunday I'd sit alone in our house wondering what they were doing, wondering why I wasn't included, wondering what could possibly require this level of secrecy and coordination from my entire family for 6 straight months. After a few months of these mysterious Sunday outings, I started noticing disturbing patterns in my family's behavior when they returned home. They'd walk through the door around 2 in the afternoon, like I mentioned, but they didn't look like people who'd just been running boring errands or shopping. They looked emotionally drained, exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. They looked like people who'd been through something difficult. The most obvious thing I noticed was their eyes. They'd all have red, puffy eyes like they'd been crying. Not just one person, but all 4 of them. My wife, my 3 children. They'd come home with these red, swollen eyes that were unmistakable. You can't fake that. You can't get eyes like that from shopping or running errands. Those were eyes that came from serious crying, from emotional distress, from tears. At first I thought maybe I was imagining it. Maybe they just looked tired. Maybe the lighting was playing tricks. But it happened every single Sunday. Without fail. They'd leave in the morning looking normal. They'd return in the afternoon looking like they'd been crying for hours. I started watching more carefully, paying attention to details. And yes, they'd definitely been crying. All of them. Every Sunday. When I'd ask if everything was okay, my wife would force a smile. She'd say everything was fine. She'd blame allergies or say the wind had irritated her eyes. My children would echo similar excuses. Allergies, dust, tired eyes. But allergies don't make your eyes red and puffy like that. Allergies don't affect 4 people simultaneously every Sunday for months. They were lying, and they weren't even good at it. I also noticed they'd have hushed conversations that would stop the moment I entered a room. I'd be in my home office or upstairs. I'd come down to the kitchen or living room. As soon as I appeared, any conversation they were having would immediately cease. They'd go silent, look at each other, then change the subject to something innocuous. The weather, a TV show, anything except what they'd actually been discussing. This happened constantly. Not just on Sundays, but throughout the week. My wife would be on the phone talking quietly. I'd walk in and she'd suddenly say she had to go. My children would be texting in a group chat. I'd ask what they were talking about and they'd say nothing important, just making plans. But the way they'd hide their phone screens told a different story. They were definitely discussing something they didn't want me to know about. The exchanged glances were another thing I couldn't ignore. They'd look at each other in ways that felt like secret communication, like they were having entire conversations with their eyes that I wasn't part of. I'd say something completely normal and innocent, and they'd all glance at each other, quick, meaningful looks that lasted just a second. But those glances carried weight. They meant something. They were sharing something between them that excluded me. It felt like being on the outside of an inside joke. Except, it wasn't a joke. It was something serious, something that involved all of them, but not me. Every look they exchanged was a reminder that they had information I didn't have. They shared something I wasn't trusted with. And that exclusion hurt worse than almost anything. My oldest daughter Sarah's behavior became particularly noticeable and concerning. After these Sunday outings, she'd come find me wherever I was in the house. She'd give me a hug. But not a normal, quick hug like usual. These were long, tight embraces where she'd hold on for what felt like forever. She'd squeeze me hard, bury her face in my shoulder, hold on like she didn't want to let go. At first I thought it was nice, my daughter being affectionate. But these hugs felt different. They felt desperate, like she was memorizing the feeling, like she was saying goodbye. That's what it reminded me of. The way you hug someone when you think it might be the last time. The way you hold on when you're afraid of losing someone. Sarah was hugging me like I was dying. My other children started doing similar things. Michael would find excuses to spend time with me. Come over to help with projects around the house that didn't really need help. Just wanting to be near me. Jennifer would call me more often than usual, ask about my day, tell me she loved me. These were all good things, things I normally would have appreciated, but combined with everything else, they felt ominous. Like my children were trying to soak up time with me, like they knew something I didn't. I'd try to ask them directly. Is something wrong? Is there something you're not telling me? They'd always deny it. Say everything was fine. Say they just wanted to spend time with their dad. But I could see the fear in their eyes, the sadness. Something was definitely wrong, something they were all hiding from me. And whatever it was involved all four of them knowing while I remained clueless. The not knowing was torture. My mind created scenarios to explain their behavior. Were they planning to put me in a nursing home? Were they discussing my wife divorcing me? Was someone sick and they didn't want to tell me? Was the family business failing? Were we going bankrupt? I ran through every possibility trying to understand what could make my entire family cry every Sunday and treat me like I was fragile. The exclusion hurt more than any truth possibly could. That's what I thought at the time. I thought whatever they were hiding couldn't be as painful as being shut out by my own family. Being lied to every week. Being treated like I couldn't handle whatever truth they were protecting me from. I felt like they'd decided I was too weak or too fragile to be trusted with information about my own family. 6 months of this pattern. 6 months of Sunday disappearances. 6 months of red eyes and hushed conversations and meaningful glances. 6 months of being hugged like I was dying. 6 months of feeling like an outsider in my own home. The suspicion and hurt built up until I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know the truth. Whatever they were hiding from me, I needed to discover it. So I decided to follow them and find out what my family was really doing every Sunday. Last Sunday, I made the decision that I was going to follow my family and find out where they were really going. I couldn't take another week of not knowing. I couldn't handle another Sunday sitting alone in my house wondering what secret they were keeping from me. I needed answers. I needed to understand what was happening. So I came up with a plan to follow them without them knowing. Saturday night, I told my wife I'd made plans for Sunday. I said my friend Tom had invited me over to watch football at his house. Tom and I had been friends for 30 years. We did watch football together sometimes, so it was a believable excuse. My wife seemed relieved when I told her. She said that sounded like fun. She said she was glad I'd have something to do. She didn't suspect anything. Sunday morning I got up and went through my normal routine. I had breakfast with my wife. I acted completely normal. Around 8:30 I told her I was heading to Tom's house. The game started at 10, but I said we were going to hang out first. My wife kissed me goodbye, told me to have fun. She seemed genuinely happy that I wouldn't be home alone for once. She had no idea what I was actually planning. I got in my truck and drove away like I was heading to Tom's house. But instead of going there, I parked on a side street about 2 blocks from our house. I had a clear view of our driveway from where I was parked. I could see when my family left. I settled in to wait. My heart was pounding. I felt nervous and guilty about spying on my own family, but I needed to know the truth. Around 8:45, my children started arriving. Sarah pulled up first in her car. Then Michael arrived with his wife and kids. Then Jennifer came. They all went inside our house. I watched from my truck 2 blocks away. At exactly 9 o'clock, they all came out together. My wife, Sarah, Michael, Jennifer. They piled into Michael's SUV just like they did every Sunday. Then they drove away. I waited until they turned the corner. Then I started my truck and began following them. I stayed far enough back that they wouldn't notice me, but close enough that I wouldn't lose them in traffic. My hands were gripping the steering wheel tight. My heart was racing. I had no idea where they were going. Part of me expected them to drive to a restaurant or shopping center, some innocent destination that would make me feel foolish for being suspicious. They drove through our neighborhood and onto the main road heading toward downtown. I followed, keeping several car lengths between us. The traffic was light because it was Sunday morning. Most people were either at church or still home. That made it easier to keep them in sight without getting too close. I watched Michael's SUV navigate through intersections and turns. I mirrored every move, staying back just enough to avoid detection. We drove for about 20 minutes. They seemed to know exactly where they were going. No hesitation, no wrong turns. They'd clearly made this drive many times before. This was a routine route they knew well. That confirmed this was something they'd been doing regularly. This wasn't some spontaneous trip. This was planned and practiced, a destination they visited every single Sunday. We entered an area of the city with a lot of medical buildings and professional offices. Hospitals and clinics and medical centers lined the streets. My stomach started to tighten with worry. Why were we in the medical district? Was someone sick? Was this about a medical problem? My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe one of my children had a health issue they were hiding. Maybe my wife was sick and getting treatment without telling me. Then I saw where they were turning. Michael's SUV pulled into the parking lot of the regional medical center. Not just any part of the medical center. They drove specifically to the parking area marked for the cancer center. The large sign was unmistakable. Cancer Center. Oncology Department. My blood ran cold. My hands started shaking on the steering wheel. Cancer. They were going to the cancer center. Every Sunday for 6 months they'd been coming here. I pulled into the parking lot and found a spot where I could watch them. My mind was spinning, trying to understand. Who had cancer? Which one of them was sick? Was it my wife? Was she dying and hiding it from me? Was it one of my children? Sarah? Michael? Jennifer? The thought of any of them having cancer was unbearable. But why would they hide it? Why wouldn't they tell me? I watched them get out of Michael's SUV and walk toward the entrance of the cancer center. They moved together as a group. They clearly knew where they were going. They weren't looking around confused or checking for directions. This was familiar territory to them. They walked through those doors like they'd done it dozens of times before. Because they had. Every Sunday for 6 months. I sat in my truck, paralyzed by fear and confusion. Someone in my family had cancer. That much was clear. But who? And why had they been hiding it from me? Why would they exclude me from something this serious? Why would they attend appointments or treatments or whatever this was without me? I'm part of this family. If someone is sick, I should be there. I should be supporting them. Instead, they'd shut me out completely. I waited a few minutes, trying to calm my racing heart. I needed to follow them inside. I needed to see what was happening. I needed to understand who was sick and why I'd been lied to. So I got out of my truck and walked toward the cancer center entrance. My legs felt weak. My hands were still shaking. But I forced myself to keep moving. I needed answers, even if those answers destroyed me. I walked through the automatic doors into the cancer center, trying to stay calm. The lobby was large and modern, with high ceilings and lots of natural light from big windows. There were people sitting in waiting areas. Some looked sick. Some looked like family members supporting their loved ones. Everyone had that same heavy sadness in their faces that comes with cancer. I scanned the lobby looking for my family, but didn't see them anywhere. They must have already gone deeper into the building. I approached the main information desk, where a woman sat behind a computer. I asked where the oncology department was. She pointed down a hallway to my left. She said to follow the signs. I thanked her and headed in that direction. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I felt like I was walking towards something that would change my life forever. Like whatever I was about to discover would shatter everything I thought I knew. I walked down the hallway, following signs that said Oncology Department. The hallway was long and quiet. My footsteps echoed on the tile floor. I passed other departments: radiology, laboratory, pharmacy. Finally, I reached a set of double doors, marked oncology. I pushed through them into another waiting area. This one was specifically for cancer patients and their families. The atmosphere was heavy. Everyone looked tired and scared. I looked around for my family but didn't see them in this waiting room either. There was a check-in desk where a nurse sat. I considered asking her if she'd seen them, but I didn't want to alert anyone to my presence. I wanted to observe without being noticed. So I stayed back near the entrance, looking for where they might have gone. I noticed there were multiple hallways branching off from this central waiting area. They could have gone down any of them. I decided to hide behind a large pillar near the edge of the waiting room. From there, I had a view of most of the area without being too visible myself. I felt ridiculous hiding like some kind of spy, but I didn't want my family to see me yet. I needed to understand what was happening before I confronted them. I needed to see where they went and what they were doing here every Sunday. I waited for about 5 minutes. Then I saw movement from one of the hallways. A nurse was walking toward the main desk. She was carrying a clipboard. Behind her, I could see people moving around in what looked like another waiting area deeper in the department. I decided to move closer to see if I could spot my family. I walked slowly along the wall, trying to stay inconspicuous. Just another person in the cancer center. Nobody paid attention to me. I reached the hallway the nurse had come from. I peered around the corner carefully. About 30 feet down the hall, I could see glass doors leading into another room. Through the glass, I could see people sitting in chairs arranged in a circle. My heart jumped. I recognized my wife's jacket. She was sitting in that circle. I moved closer, staying against the wall. I needed to see what this was. I crept down the hallway until I was right outside the glass doors. From there, I had a clear view into the room. My entire family was there. My wife, Sarah, Michael, Jennifer. They were sitting in a circle with about 7 or 8 other people I didn't recognize. There was someone who looked like a counselor or therapist at the head of the circle. Everyone had tissues in their hands. Some people were crying. This was clearly some kind of group meeting or therapy session. I stood there frozen, trying to understand what I was seeing. This wasn't a medical appointment. This wasn't chemotherapy or radiation. This was a support group. Some kind of counseling session. But for what? For whom? I looked at the door, trying to see if there was any sign explaining what this group was. And there it was. A small placard mounted on the wall next to the door. I stepped closer to read it. The placard said, "Family Support Group, Coping with Terminal Illness in Loved Ones, Sundays 9:30 a.m." I read it 3 times, making sure I understood. Family Support Group, Terminal Illness, Loved Ones. My brain tried to process what this meant. This was a support group for families dealing with terminal illness. Families learning how to cope with losing someone. Families preparing for death. My mind raced through the implications. Someone had a terminal illness. Someone was dying. But who? I looked through the glass at my family sitting in that circle. They looked sad, devastated, like they were carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. Were they here because one of them was dying? Was my wife terminally ill? Was one of my children facing death? The thought made my knees weak. Then another thought hit me like a truck. They weren't sick. None of them looked sick. My wife had been acting normal, going about her daily life, working, cooking, doing everything she always did. My children were all functioning normally, working their jobs, taking care of their families. Nobody was showing signs of terminal illness. Nobody was undergoing aggressive treatment. Nobody was deteriorating. They were fine. All of them were fine. Which meant the person who was terminally ill wasn't in that room with them. The person they were learning to cope with losing wasn't sitting in that support group circle. The loved one with terminal illness wasn't there. And suddenly, with horrifying clarity, I understood. They were fine. I was the one who was sick. I was the loved one they were preparing to lose. I was the terminal illness they were coping with. I was dying, and I didn't even know it. My hands started shaking violently. I grabbed the wall to steady myself. My vision blurred. I felt like I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be real. This had to be a mistake. But as I stood there watching my family cry in that support group, everything clicked into place. The red eyes every Sunday, the hushed conversations, the way they treated me so carefully, the way Sarah hugged me like she was saying goodbye. They'd been attending grief counseling, learning how to cope with my death, preparing themselves for losing me. And I hadn't known. I didn't even know I was dying. I stood outside that glass door, unable to move or think clearly. My whole body had gone numb except for my hands, which were shaking uncontrollably. I watched through the window as the counselor leading the group said something to the circle. Everyone nodded. My wife was wiping tears from her face. Sarah was crying openly. Michael had his head down. Jennifer was holding a tissue to her eyes. They were all devastated, all suffering, all learning how to cope with losing me. I pressed closer to the glass, trying to hear what was being said inside. The door wasn't completely soundproof. I could hear muffled voices. The counselor was talking about stages of grief, about how to process anticipatory grief when you know someone is going to die, about how to make the most of remaining time, about how to say goodbye while the person is still alive. Every word confirmed what I'd already figured out. This was about me, about my death, about them preparing for a future without me. I saw my wife raise her hand to speak. The counselor nodded at her. My wife's voice came through muffled, but I could make out some words. She said something about not knowing how to tell me, about struggling with keeping this secret, about feeling guilty for lying but not knowing what else to do. Her voice broke. She was sobbing. Sarah moved her chair closer and put an arm around her mother, both of them crying together. Then I heard my son Michael speak. His voice was deeper, so it carried through the door better. He said, "Dad doesn't even know how sick he is. We've been told to let him enjoy what time he has left. But keeping this from him feels wrong. Like we're robbing him of the chance to prepare, to make peace, to do the things he wants to do before it's too late." The counselor responded with something I couldn't hear. Michael nodded and put his face in his hands. My daughter Jennifer spoke next. I could barely hear her quiet voice, but I caught fragments. The doctors said 6 months to a year, maybe less if it progresses faster than expected. We've known for 4 months already. That means we might only have 2 to 8 months left with Dad, and he doesn't even know he's dying. She broke down crying. The woman next to her, who I didn't recognize, handed her tissues. The whole group looked sympathetic. They'd probably all been through similar situations with their own dying loved ones. 6 months to a year. Those words echoed in my head. I was dying. I had maybe 2 to 8 months left to live. My family had known this for 4 months. They'd been living with my death sentence while I'd been completely oblivious, going to work, making plans, thinking about the future, not knowing I didn't have a future, not knowing my time was almost up. They'd known, and they'd chosen not to tell me. I thought about the past 4 months, all the doctor appointments my wife had been insisting I attend. She'd been scheduling them and driving me there, telling me they were just routine checkups, just preventative care, making sure I was healthy. I'd gone along thinking it was unnecessary but harmless. Now I realized those weren't routine appointments. Those were oncology appointments, cancer treatments, tests and scans to monitor my terminal illness. The medications I'd been taking made sense now too. My wife had been giving me pills every morning and evening. She said they were vitamins and supplements, that the doctor recommended them for my age. I'd taken them without question, trusting my wife. But those weren't vitamins. Those were cancer medications. Probably something to manage symptoms or slow the progression. Palliative care to make my remaining time more comfortable. And I'd been taking them like an idiot, not knowing what they really were. All the little things from the past few months suddenly made horrible sense. The way my family had been treating me so carefully, like I was fragile, like I might break. They'd been treating me like a dying man because I was a dying man. The extra phone calls from my children, the visits that seemed more frequent, the way they'd tell me they loved me more often. They were soaking up time with me, treasuring moments because they knew those moments were limited. The way my wife had been acting made sense too. She'd been more patient with me, more affectionate. She'd been cooking all my favorite meals, planning special date nights. acting like we were newlyweds again after 40 years of marriage. I thought she was just being sweet, trying to keep our relationship strong. Now I understood she was creating memories, making our last months together special because she knew they were our last months. I watched through the glass as another person in the group spoke. An older man, maybe in his 70s. He was talking about his wife who died 3 months ago from cancer. He said he wished he'd had more time to prepare, wished he'd known sooner so he could have helped her do the things she wanted, wished he'd been able to say a proper goodbye. The counselor said that's why this group existed, to help families navigate terminal illness, to give them tools and support for the impossible task of watching someone die. My family was nodding at the man's story. They were learning from him, learning how to handle my death, learning from people who'd already lost their loved ones to terminal illness. They'd been coming here every Sunday for 6 months getting counseling and support for something I didn't even know was happening. They'd been grieving me while I was still alive, preparing themselves for my death while I thought I was healthy and had years ahead of me. The counselor said something about making the most of remaining time, about not waiting to say important things, about resolving conflicts and creating closure. She talked about how family members sometimes struggle with whether to tell their dying loved one the truth, how some families choose to protect their loved one from the knowledge, how others believe the dying person has a right to know. There was no right answer. Every family had to make that choice for themselves. My family had chosen to protect me, to keep me in the dark, to let me live my final months without the burden of knowing I was dying. They'd carried that weight alone so I wouldn't have to. They'd suffered through the knowledge so I could remain blissfully ignorant. They'd attended grief counseling every Sunday so they'd be strong enough to smile and act normal around me the rest of the week. And I'd had no idea. I'd thought they were excluding me from something trivial. I'd felt hurt and rejected, when really they'd been trying to protect me from the most devastating truth imaginable. I stood frozen outside that door, trying to hear more of what was being said. The glass and walls muffled most of the conversation, but every few seconds, a phrase would come through clearly. Words that pierced through me like knives. Words about death and grief and loss. Words about me, even though nobody in that room knew I was standing right outside listening to them discuss my impending death. The counselor asked the group to share something they were struggling with this week. I watched my wife raise her hand again. She spoke, and I pressed my ear closer to the door trying to hear. Her voice was thick with tears. I don't know how to tell him. Every morning I wake up next to him and I want to say something. I want to be honest. But then I look at him sleeping so peacefully, and I can't do it. I can't destroy that peace. So I keep lying, keep pretending everything is fine, and it's killing me. Sarah spoke next. I could see her face through the glass. She looked exhausted, older than her 35 years. She said, "Dad keeps making plans for the future. He talks about retirement trips he wants to take, places he wants to see, things he wants to do when he's not working anymore. And I have to sit there and smile and pretend those plans might actually happen, knowing he won't live long enough to retire, knowing he'll never take those trips. It feels cruel to let him plan a future he doesn't have." Michael's voice came through next, louder than the others. He sounded angry, frustrated. The doctors said the stress of knowing could make it worse, that some patients do better when they don't know how sick they are, that ignorance can actually extend life sometimes. So we're supposed to just let him be ignorant? Let him die without knowing what's happening to his own body? That doesn't feel right. That feels like we're taking away his agency, his right to make choices about his own death. Jennifer responded to Michael. Her voice was defensive, emotional. But what if telling him makes it worse? What if the stress kills him faster? What if we get 6 more months of having Dad around because we didn't tell him? Isn't that worth it? Isn't protecting him from that pain worth lying for a little while longer? Michael didn't respond. I could see him shaking his head through the glass. Clearly they'd been having this argument for months, some wanting to tell me, others wanting to protect me from the truth. The counselor interjected. She talked about how there was no perfect answer, how every family navigated terminal illness differently, how both approaches had merit. She said the most important thing was that they were supporting each other. that they were processing their grief together, that they would need each other when I was gone. Those words hit me like a physical blow. When I was gone. Not if. When. It was certain. I was going to die. Soon. I heard my wife say something about me seeming tired lately, about me complaining of pain sometimes. She said she'd been telling me it was just age, just normal aches and pains from being 62. She said she felt terrible lying about it, knowing the pain was actually from cancer spreading through my body, knowing I was getting sicker while she pretended everything was fine. She sobbed openly. The counselor handed her tissues. More pieces of conversation filtered through the door. Sarah mentioning how I'd fallen asleep on the couch after dinner several times recently. How that wasn't normal for me. How it was probably the cancer and medications making me exhausted. Michael talking about how I'd lost weight, how my clothes were fitting looser, how that was a sign the disease was progressing. Jennifer saying she'd noticed I was more forgetful. Losing my train of thought mid-conversation. The counselor explained those were all common symptoms as cancer advanced. I stood there cataloging my own symptoms, listening to them discuss my deterioration. The fatigue I'd been feeling, the pain in my abdomen I'd been ignoring, the weight loss I'd attributed to stress at work, the mental fog I'd blamed on getting older. All of it was cancer. My body was being destroyed from the inside, and I'd been too stupid or too in denial to recognize it. Or maybe part of me had known something was wrong, but I'd been too scared to confront it. The counselor asked how they were planning to handle upcoming holidays. Thanksgiving was in a few weeks, Christmas after that. She asked if this might be the last Thanksgiving, the last Christmas. My family all looked at each other. Nobody wanted to say it out loud. Finally, my wife spoke. The doctors said he probably won't make it to next year, so yes. This will be his last Thanksgiving, his last Christmas, his last everything. Her voice broke on those words. Last everything. I felt my legs give out. I slid down the wall until I was sitting on the floor outside that room. My whole body was shaking. I couldn't breathe properly, couldn't process what I was hearing. This was my last Thanksgiving, my last Christmas, my last birthday, my last everything. I had months left to live, maybe weeks if the cancer progressed faster than expected. And I'd had no idea until this moment. I thought about all the time I'd wasted, all the hours I'd spent at work doing things that didn't matter, all the arguments I'd had with my wife over stupid things, all the moments I could have been enjoying with my children and grandchildren. I'd been living like I had forever, like there would always be time for everything. But there wasn't time. I was running out of time and nobody had bothered to tell me. The betrayal hurt almost as much as the diagnosis. My wife had known for 4 months. My children had known. They'd watched me live my life completely oblivious to the fact I was dying. They'd let me work and plan and waste time on meaningless things. They'd let me believe I had a future when they knew I didn't. They'd lied to me every single day for 4 months. And they'd come here every Sunday to learn how to cope with losing me, to prepare themselves for my death, to grieve me while I was still alive. I understood why they'd done it. I could hear in their voices how much they loved me, how much they were suffering, how hard this was for them. They'd been trying to protect me, trying to give me a few more months of normalcy before everything fell apart. They'd carried this horrible burden alone so I wouldn't have to. But understanding their reasons didn't make it hurt less, didn't make the betrayal sting any less sharply. They'd taken away my right to know what was happening to my own body. They'd stolen time I could have used to prepare, to say goodbye properly, to do the things I wanted before it was too late. Dr. Harrison spent another hour with me going through every detail of my diagnosis. He showed me test results, scan images, lab reports. He explained the progression of pancreatic cancer, how it's one of the deadliest forms because it's usually caught late, how symptoms don't show until the disease is already advanced, how by the time most patients are diagnosed, the cancer has already spread beyond treatment. He said I'd actually been fortunate in a terrible way that they'd caught it at all. Many patients don't know until they're in their final weeks. He gave me copies of all my medical records, everything documenting my diagnosis and treatment plan. He said I had a right to this information, that it should have been given to me 4 months ago when they first discovered the cancer. He apologized again for going along with my wife's request to keep me in the dark. He said he understood if I wanted to file a complaint or change doctors. I told him I wasn't angry at him. I was angry at the situation, at the disease, at being robbed of 4 months I could have spent preparing. I left Dr. Harrison's office around 1 in the afternoon. My family would be home from their support group soon. They always returned around 2. I drove home and let myself into the empty house. Then I spread all my medical records out on the kitchen table. Test results, scan images, doctor's notes, everything documenting my terminal cancer diagnosis. I sat down and waited for them to come home. I was going to confront them with the truth they'd been hiding. Around 2:15, I heard Michael's SUV pull into the driveway. I heard car doors opening and closing. I heard voices. My family coming home from their weekly grief counseling session where they'd been learning how to cope with losing me. They had no idea I knew. No idea I'd followed them. No idea I'd been to see Dr. Harrison and gotten my complete medical records. They thought I was at Tom's house watching football. They thought their secret was still safe. The front door opened and they all walked in together. My wife came through the kitchen door first. She was still wiping her eyes from crying. She looked emotionally exhausted. Then she saw me sitting at the kitchen table. She froze. Her face went pale. She looked at the papers spread across the table. Even from a distance, she could probably recognize what they were. Medical documents, scan images, test results. Her hand went to her mouth. Sarah walked in behind my wife and saw me too. She stopped dead. "Dad? What are you doing home? I thought you were at Tom's house." Her voice was shaky. She could see something was wrong. Michael and Jennifer came in next. They all stood there in the kitchen doorway staring at me, staring at the medical records on the table. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence stretched out painfully. I finally broke it. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, diagnosed 4 months ago. 6 to 18 months to live with treatment, maybe less without it. My voice was flat, cold, emotionless. I watched their faces as the words hit them. My wife started crying immediately. Sarah grabbed onto the counter like her legs were giving out. Michael and Jennifer just stood there, frozen in shock. They'd been caught. Their secret was out. My wife moved toward me. "How did you find out? Who told you?" Her voice was desperate, panicked. She was trying to figure out how their carefully constructed lie had fallen apart. I told her I'd followed them this morning. I'd watched them go into the cancer center. I'd seen them sitting in that support group learning how to cope with my death. Then I'd gone to Dr. Harrison and demanded my complete medical records. I knew everything now. Every detail they'd been hiding from me for 4 months. My wife burst into sobs. "We were trying to protect you. The doctors said the stress of knowing could make it worse. We wanted you to have a few more months of normalcy, a few more months of happiness before you had to face this. We were trying to do the right thing." She was crying so hard she could barely get the words out. Sarah moved to comfort her. Both of them were sobbing. Michael and Jennifer looked devastated, guilty, like children who'd been caught doing something terrible. I stood up from the table. I was shaking with emotion, not just anger, hurt, betrayal, grief, everything hitting me at once. "You took away my right to know what was happening to my own body. You stole 4 months from me. 4 months I could have spent preparing, making peace, doing the things I wanted to do before I die. You let me waste time on meaningless things thinking I had forever, thinking I was healthy. You lied to me every single day." My wife tried to explain, tried to justify what they'd done. She said the doctors had told her some patients do better when they don't know how sick they are, that the psychological burden of knowing you're dying can actually speed up the disease, that she'd been trying to give me a few more months of quality life, that she'd been trying to protect me from the pain they were all living with, that watching me be happy and oblivious was the only thing keeping her going some days. Sarah spoke up. "We were going to tell you, Dad, eventually. We just wanted to wait until we knew how to say it, until we'd learned how to help you through it. That's why we've been going to counseling. We've been learning how to support someone through terminal illness, how to be there for you when you found out. We weren't trying to hurt you. We were trying to love you." Her voice broke. She was crying as hard as my wife. Michael stepped forward. "I disagreed with this from the beginning. I wanted to tell you right away. I thought you had a right to know. But Mom convinced us this was better. That letting you be happy for a little while longer was worth the lie. I'm sorry, Dad. I should have insisted we tell you. This is my fault too." He looked broken, defeated, like he'd been carrying guilt about this for months. Jennifer added her own apology. Said she'd gone along with it because she couldn't bear the thought of telling me I was dying. She'd wanted to protect me from that pain even though it meant lying. She said every day for 4 months she'd wanted to confess, to be honest with me. But she'd kept quiet because she'd been afraid of destroying what little time I had left. She said she was sorry, that she loved me, that everything they'd done came from a place of love even if it was misguided. I listened to all their explanations, all their justifications, all their apologies. I understood what they were saying. I could see they'd been suffering, that they'd been trying to protect me in their own confused way, that they'd been carrying an impossible burden alone so I wouldn't have to. But understanding their reasoning didn't make it okay, didn't erase the betrayal, didn't give me back the 4 months they'd stolen from me. I sat back down at the kitchen table with all my medical records spread out in front of me. My family stood there crying and apologizing. Part of me wanted to yell at them, to scream about how they'd betrayed my trust, how they'd treated me like a child who couldn't handle the truth, how they'd robbed me of the chance to prepare for my own death. The anger was real and justified, but looking at their devastated faces, I felt something else too. Understanding. Complicated, painful understanding of why they'd done this. My wife had been living with my death sentence for 4 months. 4 months of knowing her husband was dying. 4 months of watching me go about my life completely unaware. 4 months of lying to me every single day while her heart was breaking. She'd wake up next to me, knowing I had months left to live. She'd make my breakfast, knowing it might be one of the last breakfasts we'd share. She'd kiss me goodbye when I left for work, wondering if she'd already lost too much time with me. Every doctor's appointment she'd taken me to had been an oncology visit, not routine checkups like she'd told me. She'd sat there listening to doctors discuss my prognosis, watching scans showing tumors spreading through my body, hearing timelines for how long I had left. Then she'd had to come home and pretend everything was fine, pretend we had years ahead of us, smile and talk about future plans she knew we'd never make. The weight of that deception must have been crushing. My children had been suffering too. Sarah was 35 years old, facing the reality of losing her father. She'd been coming to our house more often, spending extra time with me, hugging me longer than usual. Not because she was being overly sentimental, because she was saying goodbye. Every hug was her trying to memorize what I felt like. Every conversation was her soaking up my voice. She'd been grieving me while I was still alive, watching her father's time run out while pretending everything was normal. Michael had wanted to tell me from the beginning. I'd heard him say that in the support group. He'd disagreed with keeping it secret. He'd thought I deserved to know. But he'd been outvoted by my wife and sisters. He'd gone along with their decision, even though it went against his instincts. And he'd been living with guilt about it for 4 months. Guilt about lying to me. Guilt about not fighting harder to tell me the truth. He'd been trapped between respecting his mother's wishes and doing what he thought was right. Jennifer had been trying to protect me from pain. She'd been afraid to tell me I was dying because she couldn't bear to see me suffer with that knowledge. So she'd chosen to suffer alone instead. She'd carried the burden so I wouldn't have to. She'd cried every Sunday at that support group learning how to cope with losing me. Then she'd come home and act cheerful around me, put on a brave face, pretend her father wasn't dying. The emotional toll of that performance must have been enormous. They'd all been making sacrifices to protect me, going to grief counseling every Sunday, learning how to support someone through terminal illness, preparing themselves for my death while keeping me in blissful ignorance. They'd thought they were giving me a gift, a few months of normalcy before everything fell apart. A few months of happiness before I had to face the reality of dying. They'd meant well, even if their execution was flawed. I thought about what my life had been like for the past 4 months. I'd been working my normal job, stressing about deadlines and projects and office politics, coming home tired and complaining about my day, wasting time on things that didn't matter, making plans for retirement, talking about trips I wanted to take, living like I had decades ahead of me. I'd been happy in my ignorance, unburdened by the knowledge of my impending death. Meanwhile, my family had been living in constant pain, watching me waste time on meaningless things while their clock counted down my remaining days. Listening to me make plans for a future I wouldn't have. Seeing me stressed about work that wouldn't matter once I was gone. They'd wanted to tell me to quit my job, to stop worrying about things that didn't matter, to focus on what was important while I still had time. But they'd stayed silent. Let me live my life the way I wanted, even if it meant watching me waste precious time. The doctors had told my wife that stress could make the cancer progress faster, that the psychological burden of knowing you're dying can actually shorten your remaining time, that some terminal patients do better when they're not focused on their death. My family had taken that advice seriously. They'd thought by keeping me ignorant they were giving me more time. Maybe they were right. Maybe if I'd known 4 months ago, the stress would have killed me faster. Maybe I wouldn't have made it this long. I looked at my wife sobbing at the kitchen counter, at Sarah holding on to her for support, at Michael and Jennifer standing there looking devastated. They weren't monsters. They weren't cruel people who'd lied to hurt me. They were my family who loved me, who'd been trying to protect me in the only way they knew how. They'd made a choice, maybe not the right choice, but a choice born from love and desperation and fear of losing me. Yes, they'd taken away my right to know about my own diagnosis. Yes, they'd stolen 4 months I could have spent preparing. Yes, they'd lied to me every single day. But they'd done it while suffering themselves. They'd carried the weight of my death so I wouldn't have to. They'd cried every Sunday so I could smile every day. They'd broken their own hearts trying to protect mine. That had to count for something. The anger was still there. The hurt and betrayal were real. I wasn't ready to forgive them completely, but I could understand them. I could see they'd been in an impossible situation with no good options. Tell me and watch me suffer with the knowledge, or hide it and suffer alone while giving me a few months of peace. They'd chosen the second option. They'd chosen to suffer so I wouldn't. That took a kind of terrible love. I looked at my wife. How much time do I have left? What did the doctors actually say? My voice was calmer now, less angry, more resigned. She wiped her eyes and took a shaky breath. 6 to 18 months with aggressive treatment, maybe 8 months if you're lucky. The cancer is very advanced. It's spread too far for surgery. Chemo might buy some time, but it won't save you. We're looking at less than a year, no matter what we do. Her voice broke on those last words. Less than a year. We spent the rest of that Sunday afternoon talking. Really talking for the first time in 4 months. My family explained everything they'd been going through. Every doctor's appointment. Every scan showing the cancer spreading. Every prognosis that got progressively worse. They told me about the first support group session they'd attended 6 months ago. How they'd all sat there crying, listening to other families talk about losing their loved ones to terminal illness. How they'd realized they needed help coping with what was coming. My wife explained how she'd been secretly giving me cancer medications disguised as vitamins. How she'd been monitoring my symptoms while pretending everything was normal. How she'd been in constant communication with my oncology team, adjusting my treatment without me knowing. She showed me pill bottles I'd been taking daily. I'd thought they were supplements for my age. They were actually drugs to slow the cancer's progression and manage my pain. I'd been in treatment for 4 months without realizing it. Sarah talked about how hard it had been to act normal around me. How every time she saw me, she wanted to tell me the truth. How those long hugs were her way of saying goodbye a little bit at a time. She said she'd been taking videos of me when I wasn't looking, recording my voice, capturing moments she could watch after I was gone. She'd been creating a library of memories while I thought she was just being sentimental. Michael admitted he'd been angry at my wife for months about the decision to keep it secret. He'd felt it was wrong to deny me the truth. But he'd gone along with it because he didn't want to tear the family apart during this crisis. He said he was relieved I finally knew that the lying had been eating him alive, that he'd rather face my anger than continue the deception. Jennifer said she'd been writing letters to me, things she wanted to say but couldn't while I didn't know I was dying. Letters about what I meant to her, about memories from childhood, about life lessons I'd taught her. She planned to give them to me eventually. Now she could give them to me while I was still alive to read them, while I could still respond and share my own thoughts. We talked about what came next. I had maybe 8 months if I was lucky. Probably less. The cancer was aggressive and advanced. It had already spread to my liver and other organs. Even with treatment, the outcome was certain. I was going to die. The only question was how I wanted to spend whatever time I had left. Did I want aggressive chemotherapy that might buy me a few extra months but would make me sick and miserable? Or did I want quality over quantity? More time feeling terrible or less time feeling okay? I told them I needed to think about it, that finding out you're dying is a lot to process in one afternoon, that I needed time to adjust to this new reality. They understood. My wife said the oncology team was ready to meet with me whenever I wanted, that they'd explain all my options, that I could make informed decisions now that I finally knew the truth. There was something darkly funny about that. Informed decisions. Like I'd been making uninformed decisions for the past 4 months because nobody had bothered to inform me I was dying. But I wasn't angry anymore. The rage had burned out, leaving behind something softer. Sadness. Grief for the life I wouldn't get to live. Fear about dying. About pain. About leaving my family behind. But also gratitude that I still had some time. That I could spend my remaining months with the truth out in the open. That we could face this together instead of them facing it alone while I remained oblivious. I told my family I wanted to attend the Sunday support group with them, that I didn't want to be excluded anymore, that if they were learning how to cope with my death, I should be learning too, that we should prepare together. They looked surprised but relieved. Sarah said she'd been hoping I'd want to join them once I knew, that the counselor could help me process this diagnosis, that hearing from other people facing terminal illness might make me feel less alone. So the following Sunday, I went with them to the cancer center. I sat in that circle where I'd watched them through the glass the week before. I introduced myself to the group. I said I'd just learned I had stage 4 pancreatic cancer, that I had maybe 8 months left, that my family had been attending for 6 months without me, but now we were facing this together. The counselor welcomed me. The other group members shared their own stories. Some were patients like me. Others were family members of patients. We were all connected by terminal illness and impending loss. Now we go every Sunday. All of us together. No more secrets. No more lies. The counselor helps me process my feelings about dying, about saying goodbye to my family, about making peace with my life. She helps my family learn how to support me through the progression of the disease, how to talk about death without fear, how to make the most of our remaining time together. I quit my job 2 weeks after finding out. There was no point wasting my final months on work that didn't matter. My wife and I started taking day trips, small adventures close to home since I don't have energy for big travel. We visit places we used to go when we were young. We make new memories while we still can. My children visit more often. We have family dinners. We talk openly about my death and what comes after. We cry together. We laugh together. We're honest with each other finally. I have maybe 6 months left now, maybe less. The cancer is progressing. I'm getting weaker. The pain is getting harder to manage. I'm on more medications. I sleep more. I eat less. My body is shutting down. But I'm not facing it alone anymore. My family is with me. We're walking this terrible journey together. No more Sunday disappearances, no more exclusion. We attend grief counseling as a family. We prepare for my death as a family. We make these last months meaningful together. Every Sunday my family disappeared without me. I followed them and discovered they were attending grief counseling because I have stage 4 cancer and 6 months to live. They'd been hiding my terminal diagnosis to protect me from the pain they were already living with. They loved me so much they tried to carry the weight of my death alone so I could live my final months without that burden. Now we carry it together. And somehow that makes these last Sundays precious instead of painful. The truth hurt worse than any lie could have. But at least now we're facing it as the family we've always been. Together until the very end.